It was finished, Johnny. The excitement of muscle cars had come to an end in the early 1970s. Insurance costs were going up, the power of engines was going down, and upcoming government rules pretty much ruined the fun, like when your middle school principal switched on the gym lights after the 8th grade dance. It was time to move on. Pontiac lingered as long as possible, and the Superduty 455 engine was the final song they got the DJ to play as everyone shuffled off the floor. The Pontiac Firebird was an American car made from 1967 to 2002. The first kind of Pontiac Firebird, made from 1967 to 1969, had a body shape called the Coke bottle style, which was also used for its relative, the Chevrolet Camaro. The second kind of Pontiac Firebirds was made from 1970 to 1981. This generation had a new body shape that was more curvy, unlike the Coke bottle style of the first-generation Firebirds. In 1973 and 1974, there was a special version of the 455 engine known as the Superduty 455. This engine was unique because it had a stronger cylinder block with 4 bolt main bearings and extra material in some places for added strength. Originally, they planned to use a forged crankshaft for the 1973 model, but the actual production SD 455 had nodular iron crankshafts with a few small improvements. There was a cam, labeled with the code 480737 in the pre-production test cars, which was meant for the Superduty 455. However, the actual production cars used a different cam. Also, the pre-production cars had a working hood scoop, but the actual production cars didn't. Skip McCulley, a former special project engineer for Pontiac, mentioned that no production SD 455S sold to the public had the 480737 came. McCulley wanted to have a higher compression ratio, a crankshaft with specific valve timing, a slightly richer carburetor, and as much vacuum advance as the engine could handle. Unfortunately, emission regulations during that time made these changes impossible. By 1973, the cost of insurance for muscle cars had gone up, which made car manufacturers hesitant to produce them. Muscle cars were notorious for guzzling gas, making them expensive to run. Despite all these challenges, Pontiac went ahead and created the Trans Am in 1973. Surprisingly, this muscle car became very popular. The special Super Duty engine allowed Pontiac to make some adjustments, making it a desirable car for its time. It gained a reputation as the fastest Pontiac ever. Putting this engine into the Firebird was not easy because the F-body line was almost discontinued after 1972. Sales of pony cars had dropped significantly as younger buyers looked for more fuel-efficient cars. As a result, Firebird sales fell by over 56% between 1971 and 1972, with only 1,286 of them being Trans Ams. Luckily, Pontiac had passionate people who kept the Super Duty 455 project alive. The engineers were well into the project when the market turned away from high-performance cars, so it didn't take much to finish the Super Duty 455. Pontiac revealed the engine to the press in the summer of 1972, and the response was very positive. There was a lot to be excited about. Nearly every part of the engine was unique, from the block and heads to the moving parts, intake manifold, carburetor, and more. It was initially announced with a power rating of 310 horsepower, and they planned to introduce it at the start of the 1973 model year. However, there were delays because Pontiac's interpretation of the EPA's emissions test didn't go as planned, pushing back production. The Super Duty 455 engine was built upon the existing 455 V8, so it wasn't seen as a completely new engine design. Because of this, the Super Duty only needed to pass the emissions test after a 4,000-mile break-in period, and it didn't have to go through the full 50,000 miles of testing. Pontiac also didn't have to invest in expensive laboratory testing programs for the Super Duty. This was because the EPA already had information on the standard 455 engine on file, so it could pass without additional testing. Interestingly, the engine's popularity didn't translate to high sales numbers. The delayed release in 1973 limited the production in the first year, and only 1,001 additional cars with the SD engine were built in 1974, making a total of 1,296 over 2 years. The cost was likely a factor, as the $521 extra for the Trans Am was equivalent to over $3,700 in today's money when adjusted for inflation. And this was on top of the already higher-priced 250 HP 455 engine, making the true cost around $700 more than a base Trans Am model. Some dealers also charged more because the car was hard to find. You couldn't miss the distinctive shaker hood on the Trans Am Superduty 455. When it first came out in 1970, it was a functional air inlet. But for the 1973 and 1974 Trans Am, Pontiac had to close it off to reduce noise levels. Apart from the shaker hood, another unique feature of these cars was the Screaming Chicken decal. This eye-catching design was created by Pontiac designers Bill Porter and Norm Inouye in 1970. However, it didn't become a standard feature until 1973. It remained the signature feature of the Trans Am through 1981 before returning as an option for the 1985 to 1987 model years. There was a lot of excitement about the upcoming Pontiac Firebird Trans Am Superduty 455. Dealerships saw a surge in orders, but many potential customers ended up disappointed. In its debut year of 1973, Pontiac only produced 252 units of the Trans Am Superduty 455. Production improved slightly in 1974, but by the time they stopped making them, there were still fewer than 1,200 Trans Am Superduty 455 cars in total. The engine added $521 to the cost of a Trans Am and $675 for a Formula. A 4-speed manual transmission came as standard, and you could choose the robust turbo 403-speed automatic as an option. If you wanted air conditioning with the automatic transmission, it came with a different rear axle ratio. Cars without air condition got a shorter gear set. There was some confusion about the horsepower rating. Before the internet, most enthusiasts relied on outdated magazines that promised 310 horsepower. Nevertheless, when the Superduty 455 hit the streets, it earned praise all around, especially when it clocked mid and high 13-second quarter-mile times. This was impressive, considering it was a 3,800-pound Firebird with emissions equipment and a modest compression ratio. Despite a slightly smaller camshaft than originally planned, the production model was the quickest car to come out of Detroit in years, thanks to its 395 pound-foot of torque and exceptional cylinder head design. Surprisingly, the Trans Am Superduty 455 almost never happened. Yes, you heard that right. The craze for extremely powerful cars had faded away by the early 1970s. People were already switching to cars that used less fuel to save money on increasing gas costs. In fact, some car brands had their muscle car sales drop by as much as 50% between 1971 and 1972. On top of that, there were stricter rules about emissions, which came from the Clean Air Act. This situation didn't seem promising for the Trans Am Superduty 455. However, the development of the engine was quite far along at that time, and there were still some folks at Pontiac who cared deeply about the project and pushed it forward. The Firebird Trans Am Superduty 455 was quite a deal when it first hit the market. It had a price tag of around $5,500 back in the day, and it offered performance that could compete with cars like the Jaguar XKE, which cost $9,200, or the powerful 454 Corvette, priced at $6,200. Sadly, the Superduty 455 engine didn't last long due to changing emissions regulations. With catalytic converters and other emission-related changes set for 1975, Pontiac knew from the beginning that the engine wouldn't make it past 1974. Nonetheless, it was an exciting ride while it lasted. Today, the Trans Am Superduty 455 remains highly valued in the second-hand market. According to Mecum, a perfectly preserved Trans Am Superduty 455 with an automatic option can sell for as much as $85,000. The manual versions are even more valuable, often fetching six-figure prices. And that concludes our journey into the fascinating world of the Trans Am Superduty 455 and the era of powerful American muscle cars. Now, here's a question to ponder. What if the Trans Am Superduty 455 had been given more time to thrive in a different automotive landscape? How might that have changed the course of muscle car history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed learning about this legendary vehicle, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing automotive content.